So since we'll be doing rendering unto Caesar that which is Caesar's and unto God that which is God's, let's start by reading Matthew's gospel, and then we'll read the parallel passages from Mark's and Luke's gospel. So in Matthew, it's chapter 22, verses 15 through 22. Then the Pharisees went and took counsel how to engage him in his talk. And they sent their disciples to him, along with the Herodians, saying, Teacher, we know that you are true and teach the way of God truthfully and care for no man, for you do not regard the position of men. Tell us then what you think. Is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar or not? But Jesus, aware of their malice, said, Why put me to the test, you hypocrites? Show me the money for the tax. And they brought him a coin. And Jesus said to them, Whose likeness and inscription is this? They said, Caesar's. Then he said to them, Render therefore to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's. When they heard it, they marveled, and they left him. A parallel passage in St. Mark's Gospel is chapter 12, verses 13 through 17. And they sent to him some of the Pharisees and some of the Herodians to entrap him in his talk. And they came and said to him, Teacher, we know that you are true and care for no man, for you do not regard the position of men, but truly teach the way of God. Is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar or not? Should we pay them or should we not? But knowing their hypocrisy, he said to them, Why put me to the test? Bring me a coin and let me look at it. And they brought one. And he said to them, Whose likeness and inscription is this? They said to him, Caesar's. Jesus said to them, Render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's. And they were amazed at him. In Luke chapter 22, verses 15 through 22. That's not quite right. Take that back, chapter 20, verses 19 through 26. The scribes, the chief priests, tried to lay hands on him at that very hour. This is after the parable of the wedding feast. But they feared the people, for they perceived that he had told this parable against them. To be sincere, that they might take hold of what he said, so as to deliver him up to the authority and jurisdiction of the governor. They asked him, Teacher, we know that you speak and teach rightly, and show no partiality, but truly teach the way of God. Is it lawful for us to give tribute to Caesar or not? But he perceived their craftiness and said to them, Show me a coin. Whose likeness and inscription has it? They said, Caesar's. He said to them, Then render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's. And they were not able in the presence of the people to catch him by what he said, but marveling at his answer, they were silent. So this is the first of three exchanges in which somebody, Jesus' opposition, intends to entrap him. So here we have the Pharisees and the Herodians. In the next episode, it's the Sadducees. And then in the final one, it's the Pharisees again. In the next episode, it's the resurrection. And then in the final one, it's a summation of the Mosaic law. So in each case, they're trying to entrap him. Each concerns really a genuine issue in theology or in ethics. Each is designed to expose Jesus in some way, and each requires diplomacy to avoid offending one group or another or causing Jesus to be handed over to somebody or to suffer some penalty in some way. So, how does this follow? Does anyone see how this might follow from the parable of the partly the parable of the wedding feast, but especially the parable before that, the parable of the wicked tenants?
In the parable of the wicked tenants, the plan was all along, I think, to do in the son when he came, which is also the plan here.
Uh-huh.
You know, they're going to do him in. And
Yeah,
Jesus is just a little more clever at the moment.
uh-huh. There's duplicity.
Yeah.
Anything else?
They involve the son
Uh-huh.
of the, who owns everything, God.
Right.
So ownership and son and people who are being dishonest.
Uh-huh. And then so a common theme in the parable of the wicked tenants, they refuse to give God fruits in their season. And here the issue is of what is rendered to God and what is rendered to Caesar, and whether what one should pay taxes. So the some context before we actually begin to discuss the exchange between Pharisees and Herodians and Jesus. First of all, this is a poll tax, so it's levied on every adult Jew, including women and slaves. The Jewish authorities, including the Sanhedrin, farmed the tax, so they hired tax collectors who would then be responsible for collecting the tax. And the poll tax was generally regarded as a symbol of political subjugation. It started to be collected with the imposition of direct Roman rule. It actually was paid before that, but it was paid to Herod the Great, who was at least nominally a Jew. So it didn't have, quite the connotation of oppression. But in Herod the Great's kingdom was at his death in 4 BC divided into 3 parts. So one part went to each of his 3 sons. So Galilee, where Jesus lived, was ruled by Herod Antipas. from 4 BC to 39 AD. Judea was ruled by Archelaus from 4 BC to 6 AD, and he was replaced because of heavy-handedness and oppressiveness. So at that point, Judea became a Roman province. And so starting in 6 AD in Judea, taxes were paid were paid to the Roman emperor, or were paid to the empire. The So that's sort of some background on the occupation. The poll tax had to be paid in Roman coinage. Um, the Israelites minted their own copper coinage, but they didn't mint silver coinage, which is what the poll tax had to be paid in. So it had to be paid in Roman coinage, basically using a Roman denarius. So the coins themselves were minted in Lyon. Does anyone remember who came from Lyon or Lugdunum, the old name of Lyon? Saint of Lyon?
No, not Saint Irenaeus.
Yes, Saint Irenaeus.
Okay.
Right. Saint Irenaeus was Bishop of Lyon.
Okay.
A Greek-speaking bishop in Lyon. So they were minted in Lyon. The obverse bore an image of Caesar with the inscription, Tiberius Caesar, august son of the divine Augustus. So there are two problems with the coin. The first is that it has the image of Caesar, a person, which violates the second commandment, and it calls Augustus Caesar God. So also idolatrous. And then the reverse has the inscription high priest. So there is only there are the high priests, which are the priests who minister in the temple, and there is the high priest, who is the priest who goes into the Holy of Holies on the Day of Atonement, and all other priests are not really priests. So to uh, to have the inscription high priest to define or name to assign that as the title to the emperor is also really blasphemous. So the coin is highly offensive. The in 6, once direct Roman taxation or collection of the poll tax was imposed, and it no longer went to Herod.
And what year was that?
In 6, once the 6 AD, once the tax was collected directly by the Romans or was paid to the Romans, there was basically a new theology that emerged. Previously, there was a view that paying taxes to Gentile overlords was not really idolatrous or in any way a violation of worship of God or recognition of God, because the basic theology accepted that the Israelites had fallen under Gentile domination as a result of God's will, so that the payment of tribute to foreign rulers was legitimate. But roughly around the time of 6 AD, a new theology emerged that God alone, in this case, God alone was Israel's king, that the foreign domination was not a result of God's will. And therefore, it was treason against God to recognize any Gentile ruler by paying tribute. So there was a revolt in 6 AD led by Judas, who incidentally, who was a Galilean and who claimed to be the Messiah. In the aftermath of the revolt, the Zealot party formed, and the Judas's chief associate in the revolt was a Pharisee named Zadok, and the rebellion was put down, and Judas was executed. So, nevertheless, despite the failure of the revolt, the issue of paying taxes to Caesar continued to be, sort of a very hotly debated one. So the general view was that Jews in the diaspora should pay taxes based on the laws where they lived, since they were living there. The question was what to do with Jews in the Holy Land. They were already paying taxes for temple maintenance. We've discussed the temple tax. But so this is sort of a double taxation. And so the question is, should it be paid or should it not be paid? The Pharisees tended to be inclined toward not wanting to pay the tax or to pay it reluctantly. The coin was viewed as idolatrous. Matthew's, all of the Gospels mention the Herodians. It's unclear who the Herodians are. I mean, there are two possibilities. Obviously, they're followers of, or they're supporters of a Herod. But the question is, which Herod? If they're supporters of the deceased Herod the Great, then it may be, then it's very likely that they are similarly opposed to paying taxes to the Romans, since Josephus reports that that there was a Herodian faction that was favored by Herod the Great and continued to have allegiance to the Herodian dynasty. But on the other hand, if they're associated with Archelaus, then they likely are in favor of taxation. What's his name in Galilee? What is his name?
Augustus? No,
No, no. My goodness, I've totally blanked it out. Herod Antipas.
Oh, it was on the tip of my tongue.
Well, it should have been on the tip of my tongue, and it wasn't. That's not good. But
how do you get these names? I mean, where are you getting these from? From the early fathers?
From histories of the time, from Josephus, from biblical commentaries.
Okay.
So So if they're attached to Herod Antipas, then who's really in many ways whose kingdom wasn't taken away, or his portion wasn't taken away. He's still in charge of Galilee by Roman tolerance or whatever. They're likely to be in favor of the tax and payment of the tax. So, in all probability, that's who they are, rather than Herodians who were followers of Herod the Great. So, does everyone see what the dilemma here is? What
He
the
could be
trap
wrong
is?
either way. Either
Right.
way he says it, he's going to be wrong. So he had to come up with a way that
That embarrass them.
Uh-huh. Right. So if he said, so they're asking a question that demands a yes or no answer, right?
mm-hmm.
Yes or no, pay taxes to Caesar or not. So if the answer is yes, so this is all happening in the temple, and Jesus is presumably still surrounded by crowds of supporters and pilgrims who were there for the for the Passover. In later in Matthew, um, if I can find it quickly. And I can't find it quickly. Oh, yeah. In verse 33, it says, and when the crowd heard it, this is a teaching about the resurrection, they were astonished at his teaching. So the crowd is still present. So if Jesus says that you do pay taxes, then he loses the support of the crowd, since they're likely to be uh, at least hostile at best and possibly actively opposed. For all of them, it's an additional imposition, so nobody is going to like it. So the obligation to pay taxes or approval of taxes will undermine Jesus' credibility. And saying, no, don't pay taxes, obviously, is going to allow him to be turned over to the Roman authorities as a rebel and, a revolutionary, urging people to not pay taxes to Rome. So it's a dilemma. So notice they begin with flattery.
Mm-hmm.
So the irony is that they tell Jesus that he's shows deference to no one, and they're flattering him, which is expected to lead to him to show deference to them and not recognize their trap. So they're trying to flatter someone who, even by their admission, can't be moved by flattery. There's also an irony in the phrase, and show deference to no one. The literal translation is, you do not regard the face of anyone. And whose coin is on the face? Whose
Yeah.
face is on the coin?
Caesar.
Caesar. So, and then Severus of Antioch commented that believing Jesus to be a deceiver, they are untruthful by calling him truthful. So, believing Jesus to be a deceiver, they're resorting to deception.
Mm-hmm.
So, they ask about the taxes, and Jesus answers. He calls them hypocrites. He sees their malice or their evil. Why are they hypocrites?
Well, for one, they're flattering him when he knows exactly how they feel.
Uh-huh.
And they're not living what they're supposed to be living.
Mm-hmm. Right. They're hypocrites because they're flattering him in an attempt to mask their evil intention.
Mhm.
So that's hypocritical. And their words and their actions don't align. So they're acting a role again. They're acting as if they recognize Jesus is teaches the things of God, as if Jesus is a holy person, as if Jesus is wise and shows no partiality to man, when in fact they believe he's a deceiver, that he probably mostly cares about himself, and that he knows nothing about the things of God. So then, what does Jesus do?
He just asks them to bring a coin
Uh huh.
and asks them who's on there. And they said Caesar. So he says, well, give to Caesar what's his and give to God the things that are God.
So, what's the significance of asking for a coin?
Well, because paying taxes is with the coin.
Yeah,
But
what else?
God doesn't demand money.
Right,
They're
that's
testing
true.
him to see if he's going to, you know, to not pay taxes, and they're supposed to be focusing on God. That's what their job is.
Uh huh.
They're trying to test him to get him
So,
out of the way
so then why does he ask for the coin?
because it shows them who the taxes are being paid to.
It's kind of like they're in Caesar's pocket.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the coin is idolatrous, right?
Right.
Jesus
Right.
presumably
Money.
doesn't.
Yeah. I was going
Jesus,
to say taxes are for Caesar, right?
right?
The taxes
Taxes
are,
are for Caesar, but the
yeah.
coin itself is idolatrous. I mean,
Yeah.
it has Caesar's image on it. It calls him God, and or it calls Augustus God.
So that's
So,
like the last
to,
thing the Pharisees should have.
Mhm.
right, or yeah. So Jesus has no coin.
Uh-huh.
He asks them for the coin, although in Mark's gospel, Jesus has the coin, but in Matthew's gospel, Jesus asks for the coin. So the
Mhm.
implication is Jesus has no coin.
Yeah.
And so he's asking to see who has the idolatrous coin. And they have the idolatrous coin. So then what is the meaning of then render unto Caesar that which is Caesar's and render unto God that which is God?
Well, they're trying to make him, I mean, they know that he's God's son. Well, or they're trying to prove that he's not. So he's trying to tell them, well, are you worried? If you're worried about money, then you give money to who it belongs to. But God doesn't demand that. So leave him alone. Because that's all he's concerned about is God. I don't know.
And there have been a huge number of interpretations of render unto Caesar that which is Caesar, render unto God that which is God's. It's a very indirect answer. He's not answering the question in many ways. It should have I mean, they're expecting a yes or no answer. And so the basic fact when it says they're amazed,
Well, it shows great intelligence to kind of slide over all of that.
right,
He knows what they're up to, right? Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
He knows what
they're
they're
trying to
up
trap
to.
him.
So they're amazed in verse 22. So the question is, why are they amazed? One is assuming that the Herodians are in favor of taxes and the Pharisees are opposed. Each of them can see their position confirmed in what Jesus said. So that's a possibility.
Okay.
Another possibility is that he's completely evaded the question. And so they were hoping to come and trap him. So the answer is yes or no. Pay taxes, don't pay taxes. And instead, they've gotten this ambiguous answer. Give to Caesar, give to God. And what is that supposed to mean? So, it's kind of they're amazed because they're left with their mouths gaping, wandering off, realizing that Jesus has gotten the better of them. Another possibility is that they
that he knew how to get away around what they were trying to get at.
right, yeah,
They were trying to trap him, and they were stunned that he was able to wiggle his way through there.
right.
He knew ahead of time what they were after.
Yeah, very definitely. Then another possibility is that so give to God the things that are God's raises the issue of, are you giving to God the things that are God's? That may be a little bit uncomfortable for the Pharisees and for the Herodians, assuming that they're either way, either whether they're supporters of Herod the Great or Herod Antipas, nevertheless, that's a very uncomfortable question since um, Herod the Great was only part Jewish, and was always very insecure of his what does it mean? Well, there have been a whole number of interpretations. One um, is that one should pay nothing to Caesar because everything belongs to God, right? So render unto Caesar that which is Caesar's. What is Caesar's? Nothing is Caesar's. So therefore, you don't have to pay taxes. So Jesus doesn't say what it is that belongs to Caesar. And he's certainly not saying that Caesar and God are equals.
Mm-mm.
And in fact, these are rival claims. Caesar is claiming to be God, a God.
Mm.
And Jesus isn't implying that Caesar has rights independent of God. So what does everyone think of that position?
Well, I think we're supposed to follow laws, and one of the laws is paying your taxes
The law of the land.
to help the whole community. It's not like we're helping the emperor here, but the whole community.
So related to that is render unto Caesar the things that are Caesar, rendering to Caesar as a matter of indifference.
Mm-hmm.
The important thing is to render to God. So rendering to God so outweighs rendering to Caesar as to make it ironic or unimportant. Not that you don't do it, but that it's not the major focus. So what about that interpretation? So the first one obviously means that you never pay taxes. right? Period. Which has its advantage. Well, it saves you money in the short run. It probably gets eaten up in legal costs. And then, of course, the IRS will seize your assets and throw you in prison anyway. So, so how about the matter of indifference? Pay Caesar, but focus on which is indifferent and unimportant, but focus on God.
Well, when you think about paying taxes, you only think about it a few days out of the year. And the rest of the time you're focused on how you're relating to other people in your community, to your family, to being a representative, hopefully, of Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's what we do, actually. Maybe you think about it on payday when you see it in your paycheck, but
Although tax planning is very important, one can, minimize one's tax obligation through careful planning, which I always try to do. So the indifferent argument, which I think comes originally from Soren Kierkegaard, is has a certain something to be said for it. The paying nothing to Caesar is probably not exactly what Jesus meant, and probably a bit extreme. Another interpretation is based on the fact that Jesus asked for the coin, which he didn't possess, to see whose loyalty was given to Caesar, right? So if you have in your possession an idolatrous coin, then what does that say about you?
you're getting ready to pay your taxes for one thing.
Well, it says you're idolatrous.
Yeah.
Idolatrous coins are possessed by idolatrous. So
Are you saying the
either,
reading from Mark? The reading from Mark said that he didn't have the coin?
yeah,
No, reading from Matthew.
Because he said, bring me a coin.
in
Right,
Mark.
because he didn't have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
I thought Mark's was very similar.
hold on, let's take a look.
Let's see if it was Luke. I'll check Luke.
Well, in Luke, it says, show me a coin.
Right,
Yeah, so I think in all of them.
right, in all of them. Okay, take that back. So in all of them, it's they have the coin,
So he's not carrying any money.
or at least any Roman money. He may have Jewish copper money, or I mean, we don't know, but
Well,
he
I know
certainly
even the disciples, I mean, when he sent them out, he told them, don't take any money, don't take any shoes, don't take any
right.
anything.
Don't take anything.
And he didn't
The
have a
clothes,
place to lay his head, so
right,
he didn't have
right.
anything.
It may well be that he has no money.
Yeah.
So, so this interpretation is that if um, you have the coin, an idolatrous coin, then you're obviously idolatrous. You either are worshiping the emperor or you are worshiping Mammon. And in that case, you're obligated to pay. Worshippers of the emperor should pay the emperor. Worshippers of Mammon should pay.
But I don't think that's God's position, is it? I don't think so.
Well, the Pharisees ask who about giving money to Caesar, whether to pay the tax, and Jesus uses the word give back literally.
Mhm.
So the implication is that all you're actually doing is giving back something that is borrowed. The idolatrous coin that belongs to is in your possession. You're giving it back to him. And you're obligated to do that because the coin is Caesar's. It's not yours. It's Caesar's image that's on it. Caesar is being deified or, whatever, elevated to the status of God. Caesar is the high priest, and which evidently, in your mind preempts the real high priest. So back to um, really only giving back to Caesar what he already has. Caesar, of course, would dispute that, but
So I have a coin here, and I think that's probably why they wrote "In God We Trust" on our coin, so we don't have to worry about this issue.
it may be.
There you go. That was a smart
The problem is that when we trust in our money, we often don't trust in God.
Well, we have to, we can't trust Mammon. We can't use it as an idol. It just dawned on me. It always says "In God We Trust." I wanted to make sure it still did, so I had to check it out.
Uh-huh. So what about that interpretation?
Yeah, you're just returning what's already his.
Returning what's already his.
I'm sure Caesar felt that way.
This vision kind of, it's similar to like when we like it's tithe, how do you guys say, pay tithe to the church? It's like we are like giving back what God gave us. So like it's a similar vision in there.
Not. I think in terms of, the important thing is that the coin is idolatrous. So and it's Caesar's coin. So it's not exactly that. It's sort of what is the word? It's it's an exception.
Okay.
Caesar is not. The claims of Caesar and the claims of God are hardly to be equated. Caesar can, for the most part, hardly be regarded as a benefactor. And it may be argued that the Romans provide stability and Pax Romana was mostly a period of peace, and so that's beneficial. But certainly you give back to God out of gratitude for and thankfulness for what God has given you, as well as to advance the kingdom of God. I don't think that's sort of, that's not on at all the same level as paying taxes to Caesar, and especially in this case where, in some sense it's an imposition that amounts to a double taxation, since you're already paying the tax to the temple. But that comes to the next interpretation, that one should pay taxes to the emperor because he's God's representative.
Only
Yeah, that's a weird one.
yeah, only in the emperor's mind.
Or one should pay taxes to the US or the IRS because the government is God's representative. That's drawn especially from chapter 13 of Romans and from chapter 2 of 1 Peter. That's basically expressed in the Lutheran doctrine of two kingdoms. So that life has two spheres, the sacred and the secular, each with its own demands. And so it indicates a basic attitude of submission to the state. So we, as citizens of whatever, we submit ourselves to the state, and as citizens of the kingdom of God, we submit ourselves to the kingdom of God and the demands of the kingdom of God. So, what about that?
I feel like that only happened when in the king time, like in the king time, when like the king was also like God's representative, like David.
Uh-huh.
But that I don't see that happen with Caesar and all those other people.
It's
Often the monarchies have that too, where they're considered representatives of God.
well, it's still a common argument today.
Uh-huh.
And it's significant, that it was most strongly articulated by, well, actually, I mean, you hear it, especially, I mean, among evangelicals, among conservative Catholics, and among Lutherans. And it's significant that, the major articulation of it came from Luther, since Luther was dependent for his survival by, being protected by and safeguarded in the palaces of, the local princes in Germany, right? So he was very dependent on them for the ability to propagate his theology, and to create his sect
Mm-hmm.
or religion. So submission to a state authority was essential for him, or he would not have been, allowed to create Lutheranism. And that kind of submission to the state clearly carried over into, the Lutheranism and its response to Nazism.
So what does it have to do with conservative Catholics?
Yeah.
Have the same position, the state representative. so that it's an unconditional
No,
submission. Sure.
I don't think of it as God's.
Was that you that said that like we
Your
should?
let's say traditionalist Catholics, not conservative Catholics.
Okay.
So a kind of, if you know, for those who believe that, for instance, God has selected a presidential candidate who he wants in power. There's a basic view of, God as entitling, the rulers of states,
No, I mean,
putting them in place. And
I think anybody could use that position,
right,
but they choose, but there's clearly one position being held out for that on one side. I mean, it could be clear on both sides, and then it wouldn't be an issue.
right. So the basic problem here is that it is fundamentally, it attempts to justify using the Bible what is in many ways a really modern concept. So it presupposes that there's a separate sphere of religion, right? Separate sphere of God, that there are identifiable things that belong to God, and that there's a separate sphere of the state, that there are identifiable things that belong to the state, and they're discrete and separatable.
But that underscores that God, everything belongs to God, actually.
It has everything belonging to God. God enables and entitles the state.
Okay.
But that idea, so everything belonging to God is a traditional Old Testament idea. Separation, separate spheres of church and state is not. So Israel was a theocracy, whether or not there was a king. The people of God were led by God and were accountable to God. So God was the ruler, even if there was a king. Here we have separate spheres, and that sort of idea really is alien to the Old Testament, and really only comes into the existence around the time of the Reformation. Really only comes into existence at the point that later Middle Ages, when the authority of the church is both a religious and a governmental or institutional body that to which kings are subservient is beginning to erode, begins to come into force then. So it's really an imposition of a modern idea onto Jesus' teaching. So then the next interpretation is that
There was only one interpretation of this.
no, we're reviewing the various interpretations that assorted people have given, or that have been, very common
Right. I didn't know I only thought things could be taken two different ways. I didn't know there was like.
There are always very many. The extreme everything belongs to God position is still typical of particularly some sort of left-leaning Mennonites. And in fact, they've written a whole number of books that are actually really well worth reading and very interesting about it. The Mennonite critique of government is really well worth. They're sort of extremely intelligent. The two kingdoms doctrine from Luther is current today in Lutheranism, especially in evangelical Christianity. Another is that we pay what is the emperor's to the emperor, but there's also an implication that Jesus' opponents aren't paying to God the things that are God's.
Hmm. That's what I said, when they were trying to trap him.
Right.
They're in the position of supposedly being an example to people in what God wants them to do. And here they're worrying about the taxes instead.
Right.
So,
right. Yeah. So they're engaging in duplicity. I mean, they're lying basically to trap Jesus. They're asking,
right.
a question not because they want an answer, but because they want to use the answer to either undermine his support or have him arrested and presumably crucified. So they're hardly acting like, they're hardly giving to God what is God's.
They're acting like the servants of the vineyard.
Right, they're acting like the servants of the vineyard. Right.
They consider
Exactly.
themselves the high servants.
Yeah. So what is it that we give back to God? Caesar wants money. What does God want?
Worship and praise. He's telling them to get back to work.
Anything else?
Our sacrifices,
What are our sacrifices?
our life,
Our life, body and soul, everything we are is what we owe God. So Caesar gets the money, which is the least important part, although, of course, there are many who would dispute that, and quite a few who would think it's the important part. But Caesar gets the money, and God gets everything else. Remember, the taxes should be paid since money belongs to Caesar. And remember, in the discussion of the poll tax, temple tax, Jesus used the phrase, the kings of the earth exact custom and tribute from aliens. So the implication is, that they that their extractions are oppressive, but that nevertheless, it's one should pay them. But there's also an implication to not give Caesar more than is due. So give Caesar nothing to God. So how about that interpretation?
The interpretation of giving Caesar no more than what is due.
That also recognizes that the authority of the state is relative.
Mm-hmm.
So that means it's possible to be a dutiful citizen and a loyal servant of God, that they're not inevitably in conflict, but that the priority goes to God. So when a conflict does arise, it's God rather than Caesar that one obeys, determining where the line is and where it's been crossed, for which Christians have traditionally disagreed a great deal. So there's some reservation in Jesus' statement regarding Caesar and the state, and no reservation regarding God.
Mm-hmm.
And then one final interpretation. I mean, there's still a couple of others, but if Jesus' opponents are so ready to recognize Caesar's sovereignty when it is to their advantage by carrying the coin, then they should pay Caesar when Caesar demands tribute. So if you willingly bear the coin with the image and inscription of Caesar, then you can give it back to him since it's already his. And one should worry less about what is due Caesar and be more concerned with what is due God.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a really sort of good question that transcends the kind of discussion. I mean, we're always concerned. I mean, taxation is always a sort of tense issue, and people are always wanting to resist paying tax, often to resist paying tax. I mean, it's one thing to resist paying taxes or a portion of taxes if you feel that the money is being used illicitly, to support unjust wars, to fleece as opposed to the poor, for a variety of reasons.
Mm-hmm.
You remember Archbishop Hunthausen?
Yeah,
His
exactly.
resistance of the nuclear weapons.
Yeah,
So he withheld half his taxes so that they wouldn't go to, his taxes were not to go to nuclear weapons.
right. Yeah, so that's an example. Daniel Berg.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
I remember it was a huge deal when he did that big deal.
Mhm. Yeah, it was a big deal. Yeah, and very, very controversial.
So I quietly pay my taxes for the national parks and the education system. In my mind, that's what they're going to, but I pay all of them.
Uh-huh.
So it's my own private subversion.
Right. But the problem comes, when people resist paying taxes not for moral reasons, but because they don't want to pay taxes. So,
Well, that's where idolatry comes in, because then their money becomes an idol at that point.
right. So you want the benefits of government, but you don't want to pay for the benefits of government. Or, you don't want to pay for education, right? Because, why is it cost so much?
My kids are grown. Why?
Yeah, my kids are grown, so why do I need to pay? And right, you don't want to pay for anything that doesn't affect you directly. That clearly is um, giving priority to Caesar
Hmm. And money.
and and money, right? It's all about mammon and the worship of money. Yeah, so tax revolts are very much like that, and the Tea Party emphasis on uh, on taxation was also very much like that. Actually, that's interesting because on the one hand, the Tea Party's position on the state would be that it's anointed and authority comes from God, but on the other hand, they don't want to pay for it. So they combine sort of the worst of both worlds.
But caring for our neighbor, as the Samaritan giving money to the person that's giving care to this person. He said, if this isn't enough, I'll give you more later. I mean, obviously he was using money for what it should be used for, is to love one another and take care of each other.
Uh-huh. Right. Right. So yeah, money is is important. It's important to give money to the church. It's important to taxes also, and it's especially important to be
Yeah,
willing to pay taxes and to support tax initiatives where the addition is used for something that's important. So say taxes for affordable housing is an important thing. And there's actually a ballot initiative for it in this election. And the only reason to not want to do it is that you don't want to pay taxes to provide affordable housing. But that, is not a very good reason. A lot of educational initiatives have been voted down because people don't want to pay for it. But um, I mean, education is critically important. And I mean, and our educational system as a whole in this country is really suffering. It's not something that we should allow to happen because we worship mammon.
Mhm.
So one final comment, and we'll stop. Um, so the Pharisees and the Herodians were amazed So they obviously left not, they were taken unawares, and they clearly were not expecting Jesus' response. I mean, they probably saw him to a certain degree as a stupid Galilean, right? Since Galileans were, kind of the butt of ethnic jokes and were generally thought to be backward and uncultured and stupid and to not speak very well. So they were probably expecting, well, they thought they had trapped him into a yes or no answer. So they were unprepared, but later they accused him of refusing of advocating payment of taxes. So they clearly, had some time to think about it and kind of ponder what Jesus meant by that, and eventually came up with, what we identified as the first interpretation of render unto Caesar that which is Caesar, and render unto God that which is God's, that nothing belongs to Caesar, it all belongs to God, so you don't have to pay. So it's also, besides the fact that, they were being dishonest to trap someone, to flatter someone who they admit isn't prone to being flattered, they also tried to trap someone and were taken unawares and trapped by their own question, and only later time to reformulate it into something that they could work with. So they also were the dull-witted ones, not Jesus. So they were hypocritical and dull-witted. So are there questions, comments, thoughts? Was this useful?
I had no idea there were so many interpretations.
My favorite one used to be the one with all things belong to God. I didn't quite have the courage to implement it, but uh,
Yeah.
but that's a issue. Yeah. So the important thing is that we have to focus on ensuring that we give to God that which is God's, which is everything, all of who we are, and that's what the Eucharist is all about.
Mhm.
We present ourselves as a living sacrifice.